Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our 19th episode of 2024. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. Last night in Washington, an amendment to the FAA reauthorization bill was filed that will allocate an extension of funding for the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, ACP, for fiscal year 24. It remains to be seen if this proposal will cross the finish line. Senate leaders will need to secure votes on all proposed amendments to the FAA package, and they have a narrow window of time to get this done, as FAA funding runs out at the end of this week. The Fiber Broadband Association fully endorses bipartisan proposals to extend the Affordability Connectivity Program funding. Also, the Farm Bill is now up for reauthorization, with September 30th and December 31st as key deadlines. Senator Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, the chair of the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, released her framework on the Farm Bill last Wednesday, which includes the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Reconnect loan and grant program, the Community Connect grant program, and will address minimum speeds for the USDA's broadband funding programs. The House bill has a different framework, so they will ultimately need to reconcile these bills. The Fiber Broadband Association's next regional Fiber Connect workshop is going to be in wonderful Deer Valley, Utah. Can't wait. If you haven't been to Deer Valley, it's spectacular, especially in the summer. We'll be there Tuesday, June 4th. And the registration is, we had a home run with Richmond, and then again in Little Rock, and Deer Valley's on the same track. So thank you guys for all attending these. They're great events, and every time we just get even a little better at it. After Deer Valley, we'll be in Des Moines in September. I'm really excited about getting into Canada. We'll be in Calgary, another beautiful spot, in October. We'll be in Albuquerque. We're going to be focused on tribal broadband on that conference. And then, of course, this July 28th to 31st is our the mother of all conferences and events, the Fiber Connect 2024 in Nashville. This is going to be, last year you thought was great, this year is going to be even better. We have some really great things planned for that. And matter of fact, registration is open, and we're at double where we were last year for the event. So it's filling up pretty quick. So we'll see you guys in July in Nashville. That brings us to today's Five for Breakfast session. Our guest is my very good friend, Joanne Hovis, the president of CTC, Technology and Energy, who's going to be discussing the inside scoop on what's coming with BEAD. Before I formally introduce Joanne, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning to everyone who has joined us. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to just once again thank our platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, if everyone would keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode today, but to ask a question, you can type it into the question box located within the control panel on the side of your screen. We will have a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find that recording in the Events tab on the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. And at the conclusion of today's presentation, you will be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate your input. And with that, I will pass things back over to Gary. Thanks.
Thanks, David, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest was Jill Springer, Senior Policy Advisor for Permitting for NTIA, who discussed maximizing the benefits of NTIA's new permitting tools. So Jill did a great job of showing us the tools that NTIA has available to help streamline the permitting process for the BEAD program. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guest is my good friend, Joanne Hovis, the president of CTC, Technology and Energy, who will be discussing the inside scoop on what's coming with BEAD. I'm so excited for this session. I couldn't wait for today. Joanne is just a tremendously great friend, and she really has her finger on the pulse of our industry, no better than anybody I know. Joanne's a recognized authority on broadband markets and on the evolving role of public-private partnerships and the provision of communication services to the public. For more than 20 years, she's directed CTC's consulting services related to strategic planning, market analysis, business modeling, and financial analysis for localities, states, and tribal governments nationwide. Joanne leads the CTC teams that advise or have advised the states of Alabama, Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, and Vermont, and the cities of Atlanta, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, and Washington, D.C., and the statewide broadband networks in Colorado, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. And she leads CTC's advisory work regarding federal broadband funding programs such as E-Rate, Reconnect, Connect America, and the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, and the Healthcare Connect Fund. So basically, anything that's had to do with broadband in our nation, Joanne has been on the forefront of those activities. She's testified before Congress on issues related to rural broadband, broadband public-private partnerships, digital divide, provided expert presentations to the FCC, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, and just about anybody on the planet that really has an important broadband project. Joanne is a member of the board of directors of the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society and Consumer Reports, and she's also the former president of the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors. And she was a two-term board member for the Fiber Broadband Association, and she currently serves on our executive advisory committee. So with all that, I'm so thrilled to welcome Joanne. And for our audience, this is going to be a fireside chat, so type in your questions and we will work them into the discussion as we go. And so with that, I can't wait to now roll into this. So Joanne, I don't know anybody on the planet that has deeper insights onto where the states are with respect to BEAD and their programs in general. Matter of fact, I think you even went to law school with Alan Davidson, or didn't you?
Actually with Andrew Burke.
Oh, Andrew Burke, okay. So I knew it was, okay, so one of the NTI guys, so now RUS. So Andy Burke, all right. But you've been literally working up to this historic moment your entire career. So let's start, maybe you can kind of kick things off with kind of a brief overview of where you're seeing, what you're seeing with respect to BEAD and where the states are in the process.
All right, well, thanks, Gary. And let me start by thanking you and your team. It's really an enormous pleasure to be here to have a conversation with you on my favorite topic, which is how we are going to use these BEAD funds to solve the broadband challenge we face as a nation. And we're hopefully going to do it really well and expeditiously. So, you know, we are in this very unique moment right now as the BEAD program is transitioning from a planning program to an execution program. If you think about the BEAD timeline that was established by Congress and has been developed in considerable detail by NTIA, 2023 was really about planning. There were multiple plans developed, and the states went through an enormous amount of effort to develop data and community and public input and ISP input and come up with their strategies for how they're going to do this. Now they're about to get NTIA authorization to go ahead and do it. And that's a multi-part effort. There's lots of pieces to this, and it's a multi-year, multi-part effort. But for the most part, where the states are now is they are undertaking the MAP challenge process. The BEAD program involves challenging the map to get so that each state has the best possible map that is the basis of where it gives its grants. So a map challenge rather than an application challenge, very different to how states have run their grant programs in the past. But after the challenge process is complete, and about half of them are into the challenge process already, others are waiting for NTIA authorization to start. Once the challenge process is complete and once NTIA has approved the grant strategy, then they will undertake the actual grant programs. The great majority are still waiting for that authorization. There's only one state that's already started its grant program. Only a handful have NTIA authorization to start. So the very heavy lift, the real work is still ahead of us, but much of that will happen in 2024, with funds hopefully starting to flow very quickly in 2025 and extensively. So, you know, anyone who is interested in this process right now should be laser focused on the MAP challenge process at the state level to make sure that the map is as accurate as possible. That's obviously in everybody's best interest to protect your community, protect your neighborhood, protect your ISP's interests, etc. and then following that, very focused on the grant program itself. So we're essentially really just a year into a multi-year effort, but in this transition phase right now.
So, okay, Louisiana, they got their initial proposal approved December 17th. I was expecting, beginning of January that a whole bunch would start popping out. And then in Richmond, Dr. Holmes in Virginia said, hey, which I thought was going to be the second one that got approved. She hopes that her initial proposal gets approved before her vacation in May, and that was early February, and it still hasn't been approved. We did see a couple pop out: Nevada, West Virginia, Kansas. Are we going to? What is taking so long, and are we going to start seeing this to all this? Where are we? How quickly are those going to come out?
I think we're probably about to see a wave of approvals coming from NTIA in the next few weeks. I think the pace will pick up, and every state had its initial proposal, volume 2, which summarizes the grant program. Every state had submitted that to NTIA by the statutory deadline, which was December 27th. And the process since then has been about what NTIA calls curing, which is their review and then their requests for changes where they believe it's necessary for compliance with the law. And that's the process that is underway. I think everybody has been somewhat surprised by how long it has taken. 56 states and territories, that's a lot of volume. So I think we have to give NTIA some credit for the fact that they've got a lot on their plates, and that helps to explain it. But I think there's definitely a sense of urgency on everyone's part now, that every day that passes that these dollars aren't building new networks is a wasted opportunity. So we anticipate things will pick up with approvals. At the same time, I should note, though, that it's important that none of the grant programs, even once they have approval of initial proposal volume 2, none of them can launch until the state has completed their challenge process. So an approval today doesn't mean a launch to the program tomorrow, even if the state feels that it is ready, because the map has to be finalized. And that is a pretty lengthy process too, of challenge, rebuttal, adjudication, and then reporting up to NTIA. Once they've completed the full challenge process, the states can start their grant program, but they still have to go through curing of the outcome of the challenge process with NTIA while the grant program is underway, and they can't finish their grant programs. They can't stop taking applications until they have final approval of the outcome of the challenge process from NTIA. And what we are hearing is that that is also a lengthy process. There's a lot of curing back and forth. All that said, kudos to Louisiana. It's hard to be the first one because nobody's ever done this before. Nobody. That's an important note. NTIA has not done it. No state has done it. No territory has done it. So I think the first and the second will always take more time than the folks who get to come after, and where the processes are refined and efficient and everybody is expert and experienced at what they're doing because they've got some effort under their belts. And that piece about nobody has done this before, I think, isn't discussed sufficiently among all of us who do this work. It is so important to recognize this and give credit to the state broadband offices and to NTIA for the fact that we're undertaking a pioneering effort. BEAD includes a statutory requirement that these funds solve 100% of the unserved problem in America. There's never been a grant program or a funding program, whether state or federal, for broadband that had that requirement. So, both state and federal grant makers in the past have put out requests for proposals, received the applications, reviewed them, and given funds to the best scoring, best applications until they run out of funds. And then they wait for another appropriation. That's not the case here. What has to happen here is that these funds have to be stretched to solve 100% of the problem. And knowing how to do that, particularly in the states where we know they don't have sufficient BEAD funding to really get to 100% with robust infrastructure or robust terrestrial infrastructure, or any terrestrial infrastructure, that is a very significant challenge. And designing the strategy for that and then being able to execute on that strategy is why I think the states needed time to do their planning and why NTIA is taking some time doing the review. But I would ask everybody out there listening to us today to just recognize the degree to which this is unlike anything any of us has seen before in broadband funding, and give a certain amount of dispensation to the folks who are charged with this singularly difficult and important mission.
Well, Joanne, I mean, a couple things you said there are incredibly important. First, that this has never been done before. And I have to be so incredibly impressed with NTI because, when I saw that this whole program was going to go to NTI, I was a little panicked a couple years ago because BTOP didn't exactly go swimmingly well. But they have been impressed me ever since day one. They got their NOFA out early. They've been, executing. They built up they have 46 of their field folks. We have those folks at our regional events. Every single one I've come across have been so incredibly well informed and very excellent at their job. So I'm incredibly impressed. And so I have been very alarmed that it's been taking a while for these initial proposals. But as you mentioned, it's a big job, and there's 56 of these. And Beneath from day one said that Louisiana was going to be first. And so a couple years ago, we did our first regional event in Baton Rouge because Beneath had raised his hands, and pulled me aside saying they're going to do everything they can to be number one. And so we were going to start with them being number one in our regionals. So let me ask you. You have the maps. So if you say, working on the maps is the long pole right now. That's a moving target, right? I mean, the service provider data changes, constantly, and we're still settling out the fabric. I mean, how do we get there with this thing being a moving target?
Yeah, it is an enormous challenge. I mean, I think day before yesterday, we found out about the timing on the next version of the fabric, and many states are in the middle of their challenge process based on the last fabric. And so they have an enormous amount of work that they have to do to address that. This is a very serious challenge process, and it is data-driven, and it's being taken very seriously by the states and by NTIA. The moving target nature of it complicates it more, but it's an enormous effort. It is also, though, I will say, in my experience in this field since the birth of the commercial internet, it is the most important mapping effort we have ever gone through, because it is the one where folks on the ground who live this every day, the communities, the nonprofits, members of the public working with their local governments, the states, most importantly, and of course all of the ISPs, have the most input and the best ability to get the map right. So the starting point for the map is the federal map, obviously, under the statute. And the FCC has done an enormous amount of work to get us to that. But what the states now get to do is using their own state processes and knowledge and bringing their stakeholders and partners into the process under the rules, allow them to provide data, and then require the companies, if there is challenge data, require the companies to rebut with evidence. That's incredibly important and being done at a granular level by states that have an enormous stake. It's not just being done by the federal government anymore. We now have the players on the ground involved. So it's hugely important. And at the same time, NTIA is very closely managing and monitoring this challenge process, to their credit, again, because they take seriously the responsibility that we need to make BEAD grants with the best possible map. Determining where those eligible locations are is as critical as anything we will do in this process. So I wish I had a better answer on wishing that we had less of the moving target factor. And as time goes on, also, the map changes. Private companies invest and build, federal money is used to build, and all of that deconfliction still has to happen. But again, credit to the states for all of that work happening and the fact that they're having to repeat the work over and over again as that target changes.
Well, Joanne, the audience questions are blowing up here, so I'm going to ask you an ACP question, and then I'm going to get into the audience question. So ACP, the most successful digital equity program in history, runs out of money before the first dollar of BEAD is deployed. I mean, it kills me. But the whole NTI's NOFA is kind of predicated on having ACP for this kind of low income plan. What are we going to do? What's the plan here?
So I think that as the states are going through the curing process with NTIA on the initial proposal volume 2, the new reality of ACP, which became apparent in the past few months, or it was not apparent when NTIA wrote the NOFO, that new reality is being reflected. They are addressing it. And I think, any of you who look on your state broadband office website at the most recent copy of their initial proposal volume 2, which they are for the most part publishing as they make changes in response to NTIA's curing requests, you will see that they are addressing what happens when there's no more ACP. The problem, of course, is that it is very hard for a state to say, well, we'll just replace those dollars. Nobody has that. And this is not going to be one of those good budget years for states. It's actually a pretty rough budget year. So the states are looking for ways to try to address this through voluntary programs by the companies, and many companies have been great about offering products for low-income households, and everyone's looking for solutions, but there is no way to easily replace ACP. One just has to take into account the fact that it's no longer there. I think most companies that are building BEAD grant strategy, building their bidding strategy, have already taken ACP out of the equation. They are recognizing that ACP won't be there as a revenue source and they can't count on it. And even if it did get extended, it would probably be something that they couldn't count on in the long run. The unfortunate reality of that, though, as has been discussed so extensively, is that if we had surety and certainty around long-term ACP, I think we would see much more attractive proposals from bidders in poor rural areas of most states. And in some of those areas, we may see proposals that simply aren't fundable because there's not enough money, and ACP is not there to support the revenue and the adoption for those low-income households. And in some of those areas, we may not see any applications at all. And it's truly unfortunate because ACP could have supported BEAD. They could have worked together like this. And instead, they've really, the way this turned out, I don't think it was deliberate on anyone's part, but the way it turned out, the two programs have not supported each other at all.
Well, listen, I'm going to try to hit as many of these audience questions as possible. So let's try to keep the answers brief so we can roll through this. I'll start with kind of a thorny one. So we're in election year, November. Do you expect the outcome of the election to affect BEAD implementation? Or is there sufficient bipartisan support for BEAD that the program won't grind to halt if the White House changes hands?
It is inconceivable to me that this program would grind to a halt. It is an entirely bipartisan program. And I work in the bluest of blue states and in the reddest of red states, and the commitment and the seriousness of purpose among the congressional delegations, the governors, the broadband offices, it is the same in all of those states. I am not worried about that at all. We may see some changes at the detail level. We may see some changes at the timeline level. I mean, all kinds of things could happen, but this program is safe, as it should be.
I'm glad you said it because I'm in an all-out panic. I want BEAD to go as fast as possible before the election because I don't want to take any chances. But I trust your opinion, and hopefully we won't have any issues. All right. So does BEAD funding for a given state have to only cover construction to 100% of unserved locations, or do the state's BEAD projects also serve eligible underserved locations with allocated BEAD funds?
So the way Congress wrote the statute, the first priority is unserved, second is underserved, third is community anchor institutions. For the states that were fortunate enough to get an allocation that can cover all of that, they have developed strategy to ask for proposals for priority 1 and 2, maybe priority 1, 2, and 3, and they are trying to make sure that the funds go as far as possible to do underserved and maybe even anchor institutions as well as unserved. For many states, however, there simply isn't enough funding, so they're just trying to develop the best strategy they can to get to as many as possible. But their statutory requirement is to get to 100% of unserved. If they can do underserved as well, they will and should, but that is not a given in every state.
All right, I'll summarize this one. Basically, the question is, with maps and the exclusion of unserved locations due to all these other programs like RDOF and stuff, where they had been checked, but then they actually didn't get deployed, how is BEAD going to overcome that? So locations taken off that really never got served.
So the BEAD rule is that if there is an enforceable commitment, if someone has made a commitment to a state, a local government, or the federal government that they will bid that location, that they will build that location with infrastructure that can deliver the BEAD level speeds, that is considered served. The fact that there are some programs where the companies haven't necessarily had to yet prove that they're actually going to stand by their obligations is obviously problematic, and many of the states are concerned about it. But to the FCC's credit, it is being quite rigorous in trying to make sure that its awardees stick to their obligations. And I mean, we'll have to see how that plays out. But right now, the states do not have the flexibility to say, we don't believe that so-and-so is going to build, and we're therefore going to put it into our BEAD pot. So long as there's an enforceable commitment, it can't go into the BEAD eligible locations pot.
So this is from a GIS company. So the map challenge, is there a link to review what the requirements are for the map challenge?
Yeah, if you are looking for map challenge rules in any state, go to the website of your state broadband office and look for a document that is called the Initial Proposal Volume 1. It's either already been approved by NTIA or it's pretty close to approval through the curing process. That document lays out the rules that NTIA has approved for that state for running the map challenge process, all the evidentiary rules, all the process, the timelines. It's an incredibly valuable document, and they are, for the most part, really good plans.
All right, this last question is kind of thorny, and I've been worried about this as well. So today there's news that NTIA is planning to release new guidelines for non-fiber technologies related to BEAD. With states' plans so far along, what insights do you have onto NTIA's new guidelines?
Well, we're going to have to review them to understand, but I think it is only helpful to get more guidance, because the current framework, it's very clear that end-to-end fiber is the priority. I don't anticipate that that will change. If that were to change, it would throw every state's plans into havoc, quite frankly. But more detail about how NTIA wants non-fiber technologies to be evaluated, more detail in particular about where it is okay to use satellite and under what terms, I think that would be very valuable, because there's still a lot of question marks in that regard. So knowing that there's only one satellite company that can provide the services, we don't really have a lot of guidance about what that so-called competitive process might look like as a last resort, since there's not competition. Knowing how NTIA wants states to evaluate coverage and capacity for purposes of fixed wireless is another set of questions, and a detailed analysis of the engineering. So I have to hold on any kind of strong analysis until I've seen any guidance that might be coming. But I think it is all good as long as it doesn't upend the existing framework of end-to-end fiber wherever you can possibly afford it, and then looking at alternatives.
Yeah, so what we were told by NTI last night is that that they're not changing the NOFO. This is just updated guidance. But my biggest fear is, Congress has been clear since day one that this is a once only, this is the only chance we have. And if we don't get fiber to every American, we look at the failure of the Connect America Fund. It was, subsidized in the same areas over and over again, subsidized from 4 megabits, 10 megabits, 25 megabits, now 100 meg. We just don't have the money to keep funding. We got to do this job right the first time. And I know there's some areas that are looking at, other alternatives just because of lack of funding, but it would be a huge injustice to their citizens. But Joanne, thank you so much. I could go on, spend the whole week talking to you about this. You're so knowledgeable. And I appreciate everything you're doing with the states to help us really reach this goal of getting every American connected. So thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Next week, we're going to talk about the middle mile. So FBA has a middle mile working group. Our leaders, Sachin Gupta from CenturyNet and Jordan Gross from Lumen, will be talking about the middle mile. So we've been talking with NTIA on, now that the money's been spent and we got a lot of middle mile work left to do. So join us and have a middle mile discussion next week. Joanne, look forward to seeing you soon. And thanks everyone.
Thanks, Gary. Always a pleasure.